Hi there, everybody. It's great to see you all again. This is our final adult meetup before the summer, and we will all meet again in September. I am really pleased to introduce Ursula Bilson. She is Staff Disability Advisor across the whole of the University of Leicester. And that includes all staff, but also PhD students, because PhD students have to do lecturing in the university. And so what Ursula does is support them in the workplace with whatever adjustments are needed and advice and guidance. She's going to be talking about passports in the workplace today, and University of Leicester are doing a fantastic job of doing this passport programme across the whole of the uni. What we know is that these passports have been happening for the past 10 years at least. And Becky Morris, who's with us tonight, knows a lot about passports through Embed. But passports happen in a lot of other sectors, like the College of Policing, the Civil Service, unions, TUC, British Telecom. They tend to happen in quite big organisations. And of course, the University of Leicester is a big organisation. And what we're going to hear from Ursula is something of a case study of how a passport is put together across a big organisation. So without an ado, I'm going to pass over to Ursula, who has also said that she will take questions during her talk. So thanks so much, Ursula.
Nice. So hopefully you can see the slides.
You can see it.
Cool. Good. So I'm not saying we've got the answers, but we're mid-process, so this is a great opportunity to do lots of discussion on what we found out. So the aim of the session is just to give people a bit of an idea of where we're at. So I'm going to start with talking a bit about the structure of our organisation, so that hopefully we'll put it into context for people who like seeing the big picture, and then I'll say currently where we are so far with our journey with supporting people and with implementing a passport or passport-like structure or device, and some examples I've found. I'm sure the people here will be aware of others. And then hopefully we'll have some discussion points. I've got a mind map with some discussion points, mainly because I like mind maps, but we'll see. So to put into context, I've mostly worked in university, so I'm afraid that is the sector that I'm familiar with. I've been in 4 so far. I am old enough to remember the workplace when it was possible to discriminate directly. People say, "Oh, you're dyslexic, who hired you?" Nice, encouraging things like that. But I've been a DSA assessor since 2003. So DSA is Disabled Student Allowance. And that's, if you're not aware, that's funding for students in higher education. And I've been an assessment centre manager. This seems to be moving on automatically, which is not what I expected. So basically, that means I'm familiar with software, hardware, reasonable adjustments, being that person that makes the reasonable adjustments. But because I've had the experience of writing the reports to make the recommendations for students, I am particularly interested in the why the things are recommended, which is probably explains a little bit of where I'm coming from when I look at the documents and the structures around some of these things. I have access to work myself, and I've been very privileged to line manage colleagues who also have reasonable adjustments and access things like access to work too. So a bit about our organisation. Although we are a university, yes, we have a lot of admin roles, all of the roles that you'd expect large organisations to have, along with academics, but we have quite a lot of non-computer based jobs. So have an arts centre where there are, theatre and lighting technicians that spend their days painting flats and climbing up and down, fixing lights to things. We have a space park. I don't know much about what they do there. And then there's archaeology teams based all around the country, doing all manner of specialist things, clinical staff in hospitals, including a body dissection unit, all sorts of labs, and right through to we have a glassblower whose role it is to replace some of the very specialist bits that fit onto some of the lab equipment by literally making them by glass blowing. So a real broad range of roles. So
Okay, we're at your, you've got a diagram here, so Ursula, EDI team.
can you not hear that?
No,
Right. Sorry. Okay, I've got my colleague explaining the diagram, so ignore the dot then. So this is a little bit complex, but the point is to say it's quite an advanced structure for EDI. So it's a flow chart. At the top, we've got a Quality and Diversity Inclusion Committee. So that's a high-level committee chaired by the Vice Chancellor. And on the right of the screen, you've got some boxes in yellow. Doesn't matter what the acronyms are, they're the different academic sections, and they have a college EDI structure, which has got an EDI lead, and they're backed up with the bits at the red and bottom where they're student involvement, liberation champions and groups. And each of those squares where there's a red, that represents that there's students involved in those. So on the corporate services structure, the students are postgraduate research students. The boxes on the other side represent staff equality fora. So we've got a multi-faith advisory group, but then there's a disability equality action group, which has a staff forum that any member of staff can join, and then the chairs of that feed into and lead into the formal disability equality action group. And there's a couple of other committees there that cover gender, LGBT plus, and race and equality. But also around that, we have a couple of other groups like Carers Network, there's an Institute for Inclusivity in Higher Education, and then there's another group that's taking a student lead for EDI and things like universal design. And in the middle, in between both of those structures, we have our equality, diversity, and inclusion team, and they support both staff and students as well. So there's quite a complex structure where there's EDI in lots and lots of areas of the university, which is relevant when it comes to consultation. So we have established support facilities. So the staff forum is very well, has been established for about 8 years now, well attended. They have some what they would call wins, where there's been things not right and they've managed to take them up through that committee structure and get things changed. One of them actually was this post, so saying that staff have students have a team they can go to for disability support, discuss adjustments, help with filling out forms for funding like Disabled Student Allowance, but staff don't have an equivalent. But so this post, my post, was created as staff disability advisor, but already in existence for quite a long time. There's been assistive technology available for staff to use, things like mind mapping, text help read and write, but not the ability to publicise it and let people know it's there, or the ability to tell people what it is and how it might help them. We have a fairly new in-house coaching and mentoring setup, ranges of ergonomic chairs, keyboards and mice to try. Just to put it in context, we have something called WorkSmart, which is the hybrid working, and people have a range of stations with equipment, including height adjustable desks and things that you can book to work at. And we have WorkSmart agreements, which are intended to be clear that yes, you work from home 2 days a week, you work from home 3 days a week, and things like that. And there's a whole range of policies that support potentially reasonable adjustments, which I'm sure is in common with other organisations. We've got a very long established access to work process, so probably for about 20 years at least. This has been in place. So there's a very detailed access to work guide, which has case studies and has a good long description about what it's like, what to expect, and really importantly, a central fund for the employer's contribution part of access to work funding, which we class as a large employer, so that can be £1,000 plus 20% of some things that are funded. And my post is in place for people to speak to before and during, and I do help people process those claims. We also have an in-house occupational health and wellbeing team on site as well, and there's central ordering processes for things, including we have a named person to go to in our digital services IT department who makes things happen. So names of staff involved are kept at a minimum. So to give you an idea of how many people go through some access to work, so bear in mind we've got roughly about 3,800 staff. The numbers of people applying for access to work has gone 14, 20, 39 last year, and it's 47 so far this financial year, which is coming towards an end. So it's being very well utilised. So where are we at with this process? Well, we've got the opportunity of revising our maximising attendance policy. It's been in place since 2018. It's due to be revised. A lot of people were unhappy with that name because it doesn't cover sickness, doesn't cover support, but it's what would otherwise be called a sickness policy. So it is actually changing its name to sickness absence policy. And there is currently discussion about whether to have a separate disability leave policy. That's something that the members of the staff disability forum are very clear that they would like to have, because quite often you're disabled, you're not sick. And so as part of this revision process, there is a document called an adjustments passport that's in progress. So at the minute, there isn't anything specific yet to back that up, a specific process. There's a lot of discussions about how this might happen, how this might be set up, and naturally a bit of concern that you can't just create a document and release it into the wild and expect everything to be understood and used consistently. So it's been to myself for comment and feedback, and the draft has been to the staff disability forum for comment, where it's been well received as an idea. And definitely a way to record reasonable adjustments is something that has been asked for, but there's been a lot of comment on the content as well at the minute. So there's still a lot that needs to be clarified. But if you go back to that complicated diagram I showed earlier, it's going to go to the unions after the next set of revisions, and then it's going to go through the other parties and through that structure, and then end up with the Disability Equality Action Group. So lots and lots of consultation. So we're probably somewhere towards the, not quite the middle of that process at the moment. So why have we brought it in? Well, it's a natural progression from having a lot of people going for access to work and utilising that and having a lot of things in place. And it will complement the multiple policies that we do have that support staff. And we are, as an organisation, we have senior management commitment to move from the Disability Confident Level 2 scheme to move to the Level 3. That's already an aim that we've got. And this could be a useful piece of work to be part of that. Well, rather than disadvantages, I've put what can possibly go wrong. So this is what I think we'll probably spend a lot of time discussing, because I'm sure people have experiences of, if not this, of some similar situation where you're trying to get across your requirements in the workplace. But we do need something to back it up and clarify what you're supposed to do with it and how. But by the same time, it does need to be flexible. So the individual, their job, we can't all assume you're either an academic or you're back-end office staff sitting doing processes or one-to-one with students. There's a lot of difference, and we need it to be used consistently. And as we have quite a bit of EDI embedded, so the consultations are really quite large. So I thought this was a really useful comment. So the big workplace adjustment survey has just been published. Some of you might well be aware of that. It's a repeat of something the business disability forum have run a couple of times before. So in the current one, they've said some employees said they love their passports, but key to this and the experience of having a passport was having a good manager who was understanding of disabilities and conditions and who knew how to use and complete the passport with them. Document to employees and asking them to fill it in themselves. This is poor practice and not how the passport was intended to be used. And that's quite significant because I think it was the Business Disability Forum who, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, might have been the Business Disability Forum who first started talking about the take with you between employers. And it may be well meant that people have said, here, fill this in. So we've also got Lord Holmes recently published a report looking specifically at disabled students' allowance in higher education. And similarly, there's a quote here where he's calling on a digitally enabled passport could simplify the current system and transform the opportunities and outcomes for millions. Credentials could be securely secured without the need for multiple submissions of the same information. A great connection between disabled citizen and sensible to me. And further back than that, Cardiff University did a report on members of the legal profession who have disabilities, and their legally disabled report called on something similar to the TUC GMB example that's out there, which I think might be the one that was adopted by BT or created with BT. And this also recommends central funds for adjustments and actually calls on the industry to report on disability pay gap, which I thought was quite interesting because I hadn't realised that the Office of National, the ONS, Office of National Statistics, do actually have a little section on there about pay gap, disability pay gap. It took me a few attempts of typing it in before I actually got something other than gender pay gap, but it is there, and it looks like there's a couple of pounds an hour difference, which, you know, over a full-time salary over a few years could be quite significant for people. So something that's, I think, is a little bit confusing and potentially, and makes it a little bit frustrating, is that there's a range of titles and variations for this thing. So if we're going back to what was in that Chris Holmes report, he's talking about an interface between citizens and society. Well, if we're all calling it different things, we've all got different information in it, it's not that transferable. That's my first big concern for each organisation's creating one. There's one called a health passport. I'll mention that again in a minute. An assistive technology passport, communication passport, which actually has a little bit of a different focus. I don't mind that is exactly what it says. That's reasonably clear. And there's this, I've seen skills passport or skills audit, which looks like it's covering similar things. And actually some of the documents that I've found that are available have what I see as a similarity with Mind's Wellness Action Plan about what people need to get them well, which has its place, but I'm not sure whether it's necessarily in the same document as reasonable adjustments. That's a debate. And I have seen somewhere, I think the information is probably not needed or best stored elsewhere, like emergency contact details and PEEP, personal evacuation plans. So a member of a, most organisations probably has had to give emergency contact details, regardless of whether you have a disability or not. So there needs to be some consistent place that people need to look to find that in a panic. Would they know to look on a disability passport? Similarly with personal evacuation plans, it may be relevant to people's disability. I think of colleagues who that's all they need. They actually need adjustments. They don't need software. They don't need equipment. They don't need, anything doing differently in their job. It's just if they're unwell or if the fire alarm goes off, this is what's needed to happen. So that would be recorded somewhere else. And some, again, we'll refer to these in it, have aspirational things like, where do you want to move on to? Where do you want to go? So that's making it sound a little bit more like a personal development review, personal development plan, appraisal type of thing, which to me is confusing it a little bit. And of course, as an organisation like a university, we do have a personal development discussion process too. So Department of Work and Pensions have set up something called My Passport. So I think this was a trial announced 2021, I think was the trial announced, and it was going on last year, and it was at 2 universities, specifically looking at students leaving those universities with a disability going into work. There's not a lot I can find about the outcome of it. And I wasn't involved in that, wasn't involved in any of the meetings and discussions, but having had a couple of conversations with people who have been, it wasn't particularly well received. And that could be why there's not a lot published about it. But the gist of it was a Word document. It had merged cells. That's always a bit of a no-no, isn't it? That's one way it begins with, what kind of work are you looking for? So is that, if you're in a job, is that what you want the first thing to be? And you could be in like a job that you're happy to do, but you don't necessarily want to stay in for a long time. Doesn't mean you're not going to do a good job in that job. Is moving on the first thing you need? And this document doesn't split into types of adjustment or support or go into much more detail. It's basically title page and 2 pages. However, without a lot of fanfare, I noticed that there is something called a health adjustment passport on the DWP website. So this is a PDF, and if you've ever completed access to work claim forms, it's in that same sort of format. It's in 2 columns. And a lot of people don't like columns and find them technically very difficult to navigate. From what I can see, it's a locked one, so you'd have to print it and handwrite it, which is always fun for dyslexic people and others. And again, this isn't got, this is why I wonder if it's come from the previous one, because it's got this future aspect. What location do you want to work in? What type of work do you like to do? And then it has an interesting way of asking, do you have a disability or condition that affects your daily life? So I'm assuming that it's talking about daily life because of the link with the definition under the Equality Act that your disability needs to affect daily life. But we're talking about work in a workplace context. Do you need to know that I buy grated cheese because I'm very dyspraxic and would cut myself otherwise? Or, do you need to know, somebody's short of stature, so they have their cupboards fixed lower down than someone else would in that, it could be awkward for somebody, possibly with something like autism, to interpret, well, what do you want here? And it could be seen as a little bit intrusive if it's not quite clear. And it does ask, have you used any special IT programs in school or home or work? And then it asks again about hardware. So it is getting to reasonable adjustments. But as a neurodiverse person, would you see that yourself as having health requirements? Most probably don't. You wouldn't necessarily go to the doctor and talk about some of these things, which is the implication with health. So I'm not quite sure why it's called that. There's no explanation. But one of the longest ones that seems to have been around for a long time is a GMB and TUC. So GMB is a trade union and TUC is a trade unions council. So this is it up as well. So it's got a good It's got some good information with it. It does have quite a complex, clumsy way of asking what your condition is. My health condition or impairment interacts with barriers within and or outside of the workplace to create the following impacts on work. Well, which is it, inside or outside or both? Or again, where's the remit here? How much do you want? But it does have an open box for agreed adjustments. But then what I find quite confusing is it goes on to have another box for additional adjustments. So does that mean those are not agreed? Don't know. And again, another thing that I think maybe perhaps with the intention that it's trying to be positive and talk about things people are good at, because it starts off on a good day. I believe that my disability or condition interacts with barriers again, and then we get a bit woolly, within or outside of the workplace, to have the following impact on me at work. So again, a little bit confusing what that might be getting to. So the future, I think, is a digital solution. That would be the ideal, the gold standard if you know, an organisation could afford it, and it does help a bit with that transferability. It helps a little bit with the need to know basis, because once the Word document's created and shared, you may control who you've emailed it to, but then you've lost a little bit of control of where it goes after that. Could be accidentally stored in the wrong file somewhere. And then my big question would be, well, if the line manager changes, etc., do you as the individual need to have kept a copy and kept responsibility for that to pass it on to someone else? So online systems could be the way to go. Genius Within, well-known company, have one. Genius Finder Pro. It's a bit more like strengths and weaknesses. So you've got the positive aspect of things you're good at, which is a good start, especially when you're going into a new role. And it will go into quite a bit more detail if your organisation or you as an individual pays for access. But there is a cut down bit of it on their website that people can use. There's one called Empowerment Passport. I don't know too much about who's behind that, but that exports to a PDF. Similar setup, again, in that is can be paid for by the organisation, but individuals can retain access for so long after the organisation stops paying, and then they can also pay as an individual if they want to keep that. And that's one where it does include personal evacuation, emergency contact details. And it does have examples that are on the website. They refer to needing an access to work assessment, needing an ergonomic assessment or wellness action plan. So it indicates to me that that sort of information isn't included in the document, but it does state on their site that you can store up to 5 other reports, which is another thing about this sort of information. Is most people, I think, will come with something else that has information, whether it's a previous access to work assessment, diagnostic report, occupational health plan, ECHP, all manner of things may be relevant. Lexit also have a system, Neurodiversity Talent Adjustments Passport. And again, there starts with strengths, which is positive, and barriers. And then it does have sections for communication and work patterns and different things like that. And agreed technology and implementation date all in one box. Well, I know with helping people to order access to work stuff, you know, you may have 3 or 4 different things. They certainly don't all arrive all at the same time. And you know, ordering something and it being installed and implemented and working again may not happen with it all too close together sometimes for various reasons. And then have an amendments to objectives or targets that have been agreed to support you in your role, which is an interesting one, because that actually may well be the case, that's an adjustment that happens, but not everybody needs that. I think that's probably quite unusual, but it's interesting that's included because it is something that could be a reasonable adjustment. We do have to be a little bit careful, because I know our HR team would be considering, well, if it's actually something materially could potentially impact on contract, then an adjustment like that shouldn't be made without consulting HR. but it does have a review date, which is always good, and an amendment and reason for amendment, which, as I say, coming as an assessor background is always really interesting to me. The things that don't work are as useful to know that you've tried it and it doesn't work, so don't go back over that again. And really quite recently launched, we've had Diversity and Ability launch their Access Passport, written AXS, and this is really looking quite an interesting development because it is online access, or you can have it as an app, and the employee can retain some access once they leave the organisation that paid for it. And they're very clear. One of the first things that they say when they talk about it is that the employee can control, add and remove people to access that. So you know exactly who can see it. It's got a drop-down list of adjustments, so it may not fit some of the really diverse roles that non-computer roles that we and other organisations may have, but they are saying they'll add to it. So it could be positive in that it gives ideas of adjustments, where to go, especially got quite new line managers who might not be that familiar, but it does add quite a bit of complexity to finding the thing that's available and relevant for you, because as yet they haven't got free text box options for things. Having seen a demo of it, they do look a lot like office-based type ones for me. And as I say, why something's needed isn't covered. And if for whatever reason there's something that's asked for that isn't easy to implement, like an example that we've come across is certain software that's recommended by Access to Work a couple of times now, which requires storage of data in America, where as a non-US citizen you have no rights. And our governance team have gone through and highlighted major concerns with no right to correct anything that's wrong, the fact that the data, you are agreeing to the data being sold, etc. So if I know why somebody needs that product and have an idea of what the main thing that they would like that product to do for them is, then it's easier to talk about, well, okay, this is difficult, but how about this? Would this meet your needs? So you're almost going back into having a longer conversation with people to establish why it was recommended in the first place if you don't have the why in there. So to summarise where we're at, portability is a big question. The scope, what it actually covers, is there a bit of remit creep in there? Is keeping it succinct and to the point. What you do with related documents, do you quote from them? Do you refer to them? Do you store them together? And keeping it up to date. So keeping that record of this was relevant, but it isn't now for this reason. And then there are various other things that keep cropping up every now and again as you start looking into things. So looking forward to lots of questions and discussions, and especially if somebody's gone through this and found a really good way of keeping things up to date and relevant and making sure the right people have the access to the information.
Well, thank you so much, Ursula. That was a really in-depth outline of the passports. We've got people now putting messages in the chat. Shall we now stop the share and go to the gallery? Yeah. Okay. We've got Andrew. Andrew, would you like to do your question from your chat?
Yeah, hi Ursula and everyone. So my question was really have you got any experience of where an assessor from Access to Work has actually got a different perspective to that of the disabled person? Because I'd be quite keen to hear about that, because I think sometimes when someone has a complex situation they may have gone through, there may be a discrepancy. But it's very good and enjoyable overall, and I like kind of the very logical layout and good use of images. It really worked well for me. Just sort of feedback.
Yeah, I could think of my own example actually of where bearing in mind I've done the Disability equivalent for students, it was actually really quite tricky because I had the situation where all I needed was a second copy of Dragon. I just wanted to be able to use it on 2 computers, which I thought would be quite, not too difficult thing to go back and ask for access to it. As I'd already said, you can have Dragon and this, that, and the other. And I had to go back through the assessment process again. I said, just a second copy of Dragon. I can send you, we can send you quotations. No, it needs to be assessed again. And they were adamant. And then so when my term came up, they were adamant that I had to go through the full assessment instead of just talking to the caseworker. Okay. So I spoke to this person who said, right, it goes quicker if I do it my way. So I just need you to answer yes or no to these questions. So 20 minutes in, I said, excuse me, you do know I'm just here to ask for a second copy of Dragon. I've actually been through Access to Work 5 months ago and I've got a lot of recommendations. Oh, no one told me about that. Well, I have to go through these because I can't write a full report if I don't. But to give you the context, some of the questions were things, they were worded very much like a diagnostic dyslexia report, difficulties with phonological processing. I mean, some people may be very lost on things like that, but because I've read a number of these things over the years, I got an idea of where it was going with the question, but not necessarily with the why in this context. So in the end, we ended up having a chat, and he was adamant that, well, why did you get that? Well, why did you get that? Why did you get that product recommended? That's really old-fashioned. I said, yes, but I've been using it for 10 years. I know how to use it. I said, well, I'd have given you something different. Well, okay, out of interest, what would you have given me? Well, I'd have given you a tablet with this app and this app on it. And I'm like, but I'm dyspraxic. I drop things and break things all of the time. The last thing I want to do is drop a 400-500 quid tablet and break it and crack the screen. That's my worst nightmare. I'm happy with a piece of paper that if I spill my coffee on it, it's not the end of the world. And so we were definitely this impasse. And in the end, the whole thing was 3 hours. And so I got to the point where I just said yes to letting them put everything on it because it wouldn't have finished otherwise. I've had something similar where a colleague had, with autism, had brain and hand app recommended. And they were a little bit concerned how it would work because they'd never used something like that before, and the whole setup of it were quite concerned. But so, well, okay, put it in anyway. But when it came through and Access to Work looked at it, what the staff member didn't know is they decided, well, Access to Work say you only work 5 days a week, not 7, and you could use this on Saturday and Sunday as well. So therefore, you have to pay 2/3 of the price. And that absolutely terrified them. And they got into this long thing of going back to the assessor saying, you must remove it, you must remove it. I can't pay for this. I can't afford this. It still would have been £150 or something. It was quite expensive. And so we had to calm down and say, it's fine. We just won't order that product. Don't worry. And if you want it, by the way, we'll just pay that bit. We won't charge you, because it was done on the basis, well, we'll pay the employer for this, and then the employer claws that back from you, which of course we wouldn't do as a large company. So they were not good examples of that attention, really.
Oh wow! I mean, the thing is with brain in hand, something I know as a user for my own specific needs. It's funny because at the weekend they don't have a support service.